My name is Sonia Hill. I'm 41 years old, and I build houses for a living. 3 days after I buried my husband, I stood on my own front porch with a key that no longer fit the lock, my clothes stuffed in trash bags by the door, and my husband's son planted in the doorway like he owned the ground under my boots. My family always said grief comes in waves. Nobody warned me it could come with a locksmith. What Derek said next, he said loud enough for the whole street to hear. And what I did 3 weeks later froze an entire room full of Hales. Froze it so hard you could hear the wall clock tick between their heartbeats. But to understand that, you need to know whose hands actually built that porch, whose money poured the foundation, and why I spent 12 years letting everyone in Maple Run believe it belonged to a name that wasn't mine. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where quiet women finally speak and families learn what their silence was holding up. If stories about standing your ground find you at the right time, this one found you on purpose. Drop a comment, tell me where you're listening from, and be sure to subscribe before we get into it. I learned to swing a hammer before I learned to ride a bike. My dad was a Finnish carpenter, the kind of man who could read a warped board like other people read a newspaper, and I spent every summer from age 12 handing him nails and holding the dumb end of the tape measure. He died when I was 25. He left me his tools, his truck, and a sentence I didn't understand yet. By 27, I had my contractor's license and a one-woman company called Hill Custom Builds, which was mostly me, a borrowed excavator, and a coffee maker that only worked if you hit it. That same year, 2012, I bought 6 acres on the east edge of Maple Run, Ohio. $68,000. Every cent of it mine, savings, plus what I got selling Dad's old truck, which hurt worse than the mortgage would have. People asked why a single woman needed 6 acres. I told them the truth. I was going to build my own house one day, with my own 2 hands, on land with my own name on the deed. I drew the plans myself that winter. Kitchen facing east for morning light, a porch deep enough for 2 rocking chairs and an argument, and in the corner of every page, in the title block where the architect of record signs, 2 letters, SH. I still have those drawings. They ended up mattering more than I ever wanted them to. The company grew. I hired 1 man, then 3, then 7. And then, the spring I turned 28, I walked into the lumber yard on Route 9 to argue about a delivery, and a man with a famous last name smiled at me across the counter. I just didn't know yet that the wallet behind the smile was empty. But let me take you back to that porch first, because that's where the story you clicked on actually starts. 3 days after the funeral, I'd spent the morning at the estate lawyer's office signing papers no widow is ever ready to sign, and I drove up my own gravel drive at 4 in the afternoon to find a shiny brass deadbolt where my old lock used to be. Trash bags on the porch, my winter coats, my boots, my mother's quilt, folded on top like a parting gift. Derek opened my front door from the inside, wearing his father's barn jacket, and held up a photocopy like it was a badge. "Dad's will," he said. 2009, everything goes to me. I told him that paper was older than my marriage. He smiled the way his father used to smile at bank tellers. Then he said it, loud, so the neighbors raking leaves across the road could hear every word. My father's name, my father's house. You're nothing now. I stood very still. In my trade, when something cracks under load, you don't jump. You listen, because the sound tells you where the failure started. Deputy Miller pulled up 20 minutes later, read the photocopy, read my driver's license, and gave me the sentence I'd hear in my sleep for weeks. "It's a civil matter, ma'am. You'll want to talk to a lawyer." A civil matter. My house, my land, my locks, and the law, standing in my driveway telling me to go find somewhere else to sleep. I picked up 2 trash bags and put them in my truck bed. Behind the curtains across the road, I watched the Hendersons watch me. I drove away from a house I had built board by board, with one question riding shotgun the whole way. Since when does a house I paid for belong to somebody else's name? Now back to the lumberyard, 2013, because you need to know why I married him. Otherwise, none of what breaks later will weigh what it should. Raymond Hale was 48, ran the yard on Route 9, and knew the name of every kid, dog, and grandmother in Maple Run. He comped my late delivery before I finished complaining about it. He asked about my dad's old chisels like they were family members. He had this laugh that made strangers feel like regulars. Half the county owed him a favor and the other half owed him $20, and somehow both halves loved him for it. Looking back, I'd say Raymond had a gift. He could borrow money and make it look like generosity. But at 28, sitting across a diner table from a man who actually listened, I didn't see a red flag. I saw a grown-up. He courted me slow and old-fashioned. Flowers from the grocery store, because he said florists were a racket. Sunday drives. And after 8 months, he asked me to walk my own 6 acres with him at sunset, got down on one knee in the tall grass, and said he wanted to grow old right there on that hill. I said yes before he finished the sentence. On the walk back to the truck, he looked over the land, quiet for once, and said something I filed away for 10 years without opening it. The Hales used to own half this county, you know. Used to? 2 small words doing a lot of heavy lifting. I heard them. I even noticed them. I just decided that a man's history was his business, and that love meant not doing the math on it. That decision cost me more than the land ever did. We married in 2014 in the spring, and I started framing our house that same summer. Hill Custom Builds put up every stick of it. $310,000 of materials and labor, run through my company books, paid from my accounts, built by my crew on land I'd owned 2 years before Raymond ever knelt in that grass. My lawyer, my dad's old poker buddy, sat me down before the wedding and talked plain. Keep the deed in your name, Sonia. Keep the business separate. Sign a simple prenup. Nothing fancy. Raymond signed it at the kitchen table without reading past the first page, laughed, and said paper never kept anybody warm anyway. I remember being relieved. I told myself it meant he wasn't after anything. Here's the part I own. The silence that came after was mine. The county assessor had my name, the bank had my name. But at church, at the diner, at the yard, everybody called our place the Hale House, and I never once corrected them. Raymond's chest would come up an inch every time somebody said it. It cost me nothing, I thought, to let him have that inch. Peace was cheaper than credit. I actually used to say that to myself, like a smart little proverb. While I signed checks in a kitchen the whole town believed his name had paid for. The day we moved in, I hung one thing in the garage before I hung anything in the house. My dad's brass level, the one he'd had engraved SH the day I got my license. The closest thing to a blessing he ever put in writing. True and plumb. It hung there through everything that came next, patient as a nail waiting for a hammer. Remember it. It comes back. Derek came with the marriage the way gravel comes with a driveway. He was barely 20 when I met him. Raymond's boy from his first marriage, raised mostly by his grandfather Walt after the divorce, and Walt had filled that kid to the brim with stories about the Hale name. Hale Lumber. Hale Road. The Hale Pew. Third from the front. Like the church kept it under warranty. Never mind that the lumber company went under before Derek was born, and Hale Road got renamed for a war hero in the 80s. The legend was the inheritance. Derek visited on holidays, called me Raymond's wife for 12 straight years, and looked at my house the way a man looks at a car he's already decided to test drive. He opened a sports bar at 24. It lasted 14 months. He opened another one at 26. Better location, worse math, and that one hung on 3 years before it finally died. Both times, the family story was bad luck. Bad partners, a bad economy, anything but the boy with the good name. And both times, I noticed something I didn't let myself understand. Derek would call, and Raymond would take the phone out to the barn and stay gone past dark. He'd come back quiet, kiss the top of my head, and say his boy was figuring things out. I asked once if Derek needed help. Raymond said, "Nothing you need to worry about, sweetheart." And the sentence was so soft I didn't hear the hinge creak in the middle of it. Those long walks to the barn had a price tag. It would take me 12 years and a bank statement to read it. What I'd find printed there rearranged everything I thought I knew about my marriage. Raymond died on a Tuesday in September, at the yard he'd run for 30 years, halfway between the office and a pallet of cedar decking. His heart quit before the ambulance cleared the second light in town. 61 years old. The man who knew everybody left a town full of people who all believed they knew him best, and for 1 week, Maple Run grieved like a single family. Casseroles stacked in my refrigerator like cordwood. Then came the funeral, and the family showed me the seating chart. Marjorie, Raymond's sister, had arranged the church. She's the kind of woman who organizes other people's grief so she can hold the receipt. And the first pew had a little card on it. Cream cardstock. Nice font. Family only. Derek sat front and center in a suit that still had the store creases, one seat from the aisle where the casket would pass close enough to touch. I was steered, gently, with 2 hands on my shoulders like a chair being moved, into the second row. The widow. Second row. I sat behind my husband's son and my husband's sister, staring at the back of a barn jacket collar sticking up over a suit that didn't fit, and I told myself grief makes people strange and small and it wasn't worth the scene. I had a lot of practice telling myself things by then. 12 years of practice. Pastor said Raymond was the most generous man in the county, and half the room nodded like a loan had just been forgiven. At the graveside, Derek shook hands down a receiving line like a man announcing a campaign. Marjorie caught my elbow and said, "You'll always be a part of this family, Sonia. Always." 3 days later, my key wouldn't turn in my own front door. Grief, it turns out, was the cheap part of that week. The expensive part was just getting started, and it came with brass fittings and a photocopied will. That first night, I slept at the model cottage my company keeps on the lot behind our office, 15 minutes from my own front door. It's staged for clients, throw pillows nobody leans on, a bowl of wooden apples, a couch built for photographs instead of spines. I lay on that couch in my funeral clothes with a trash bag of coats for a blanket and did the arithmetic of my life in the dark. 41 years old, widowed 11 days, locked out of a house with my name on the deed by a boy with his name on nothing. Somewhere around 2 in the morning, my dad showed up, the way the dead do, in a sentence. I was 19, whining that a client had shorted us and bragged about it at the fair like his family name made it fine. Dad didn't look up from the sawhorses. "A name won't hold a roof, kiddo," he said. "Load has to go somewhere real." I fell asleep holding that sentence like a handrail. In the morning, Carol Reyes, who has run my office for 11 years, and my common sense for at least 6 of them, let herself in with a lasagna and a legal pad. She put the lasagna in the fridge and the pad in my hands. On it, she'd written 3 lines. "Call Ruth Ackerman, 9 a.m. payroll. 5 weeks. You're the contractor." So contract. I read it twice, and something under my ribs stood back up and dusted itself off. Grief hadn't gone anywhere, but I've built in the rain before. At 9 sharp, I was sitting across a desk from the driest lawyer in 3 counties, and the education I got there was worth every year it cost me. Ruth Ackerman is 63, bills in 6-minute increments, and speaks in sentences that come out already notarized. She read my deed, my prenup, and Derek's photocopy in 14 silent minutes, while I memorized her diploma wall. Then she stacked the papers and gave it to me straight. The land was mine before the marriage. The house was paid by my company, on my dirt, documented to the penny. The deed had one name on it, mine, and Ohio law doesn't care how loud a last name is. Raymond's 2009 will, written 4 years before he ever met me, could leave Derek his truck, his tools, and his half of the moon, but a man cannot bequeath what he does not own. "That will pass as his estate," Ruth said. "The house was never his estate. It's not a close question." "Then why," I asked, "was I sleeping under throw pillows?" Ruth took off her glasses, which I'd learn was her version of sighing. "Because possession is a fact," she said, "and facts take paperwork to move. An ejectment action. 6 to 10 weeks if the docket's kind. And one more thing, filed yesterday morning while I was still finding a place to sleep. Derek had petitioned the probate court to be named executor of Raymond's estate. And on his inventory of estate assets, line 1, he had listed my house. A cloud on my title is what that's called. It wouldn't win. It didn't have to win. It just had to sit there, fogging up my ownership, until a judge wiped it clean. Right doesn't mean fast, Ruth said, sliding a retainer letter across the desk. I signed it. Then I asked the question that was actually keeping me up nights. How did he have all of it ready 4 days after we buried him? Ruth looked at me over her glasses. Because he was ready, Mrs. Hale. My hand was still holding her pen. Hill, I said. It came out before I decided it. Maple Run picked its team the way small towns do, quietly, all at once, and while smiling at you. Sunday, I walked into church and the temperature dropped 10 degrees between the door and my pew. Conversations didn't stop. They just changed key. Marjorie had been busy. The story going around the casserole circuit was that Raymond's widow, the second wife, the one from nowhere with the construction company, was holding the family home hostage with paperwork, while poor Derek, Raymond's only child, grieved. Paperwork. That's what they called my deed. By Wednesday, it had teeth. Tom Brannigan, who golfed with old Walt Hale for 30 years and had signed with us for a $200,000 addition on his lake house, called the office. Carol put him through, and I listened to a man rearrange his spine in real time. Now just wasn't the season, he said. Family situations made folks uneasy, he said. He was sure I understood, he said, and the worst part is he probably was sure. $200,000 of work, gone with the word uneasy. I hung up and looked through the office glass at my crew loading the trucks. 7 men, mortgages, kids with braces, Miguel's wife due in January. They didn't follow the Hale family gossip, but they could count trucks in a parking lot same as me. That night, Carol ran the numbers twice because I made her. With Brannigan gone and 2 small jobs finishing, the company had 5 weeks of payroll in the account. 5 weeks. 12 years I'd carried a name that wasn't mine, like it weighed nothing. Turns out it had been sitting on my company's chest the whole time, and now it was pressing down. And the bank hadn't even weighed in yet. The bank was supposed to be the easy part. I've banked at First County since I was 22. They've financed my equipment. My lot. Half my builds. I sat down across from a loan officer young enough to be my apprentice and asked for a line of credit against my house. The standard move, the responsible move, the one any contractor makes when receivables go soft. Bridge the payroll, keep the crew, ride it out, he typed. He frowned at his screen the way they teach them to frown in whatever school makes loan officers. Then he turned the monitor around and showed me my own address with a flag on it. Probate case number. Disputed asset. Estate of Raymond Hale. Pending determination. There's a cloud on the title, Mrs. Hale, he said. We can't lend against contested collateral. Once the court resolves it, we'd love to revisit. I sat in my truck in the bank parking lot for a long time after that, hands at 10 and 2, going exactly nowhere. Understand what had just happened, because it took me the whole drive back to believe it. Derek did not own my house. Derek had never paid a nickel toward my house, but Derek had spent $90 filing a piece of paper with my address on it, and that paper, his claim, not his ownership, just his claim, was enough to freeze the value of everything I'd built. His name couldn't hold a roof. It didn't need to. It only needed to sit on mine until I ran out of weeks, and he had learned that trick from somewhere. You're nothing now. The sentence came back with bank interest. He'd been wrong about the deed, but for 5 more weeks, in every way that made payroll, he wasn't wrong at all. Let me pause here, one breath, because I know some of you are gripping the wheel. If you've ever signed the checks and still sat in the second row, at the funeral, at the table, in your own kitchen, tell me in the comments. I read everyone. And subscribe if you're staying, because the paperwork is where this whole thing turns. Now, back at the office, Carol had done the thing Carol does, which is answer a question I hadn't asked yet. She'd pulled the storage room apart and stacked the conference table with banker's boxes, 12 years deep. Hill Custom Builds keeps records like my dad kept chisels. Clean, oiled, and where they belong. Every invoice from the house billed in 2014 and 2015. Every materials receipt, every crew timesheet, every canceled check with my signature. The property tax bills, paid from my account, 11 years running. The insurance, mine. The well pump replacement, the furnace, the roof after the hailstorm, mine, mine, mine. Carol laid it out in tidy rows and said, "There's your house, boss, in triplicate." I stood over that table and had a feeling I didn't expect and haven't fully shaken since. There was my marriage, too. 12 years of it, told in carbon copies, and it was quiet in a way that made my ears ring. Because laid out end to end, the story those boxes told had one author. One set of initials doing the paying, the fixing, the insuring, the carrying. I had always known it, the way you know your own pulse. Seeing it stacked on a table was different. Somewhere in those rows was the answer to a question I hadn't let myself ask in 12 years, and one folder I hadn't opened yet. The court gave me 30 minutes. That's the shape of things when possession is a fact, and you're the one on the wrong side of it. A scheduled window, agreed through lawyers, for me to collect personal belongings from my own home, with Deputy Miller standing on the walk like a referee at a funeral. Derek held the door and didn't move an inch more than the order required, so I turned sideways to pass my own doorframe. Inside smelled like somebody else's cooking. My things were already gone from the walls. He'd stacked what he'd decided was mine in the garage, in a pile with a drop cloth over it, the way you cover things you plan to forget. I worked fast and quiet. Photo albums, Dad's chisels, the fireproof box. And then I saw it, still on its nail over the workbench, because Derek had cleared my whole life out of that garage but didn't know enough to recognize the most valuable thing in it. The brass level. SH, engraved deep, going green at the edges. I took it down and the weight of it settled into my palm like a handshake. "Take your junk and let's go," Derek said from the doorway, checking the time on his father's watch, which rode his wrist like a loan he had no plan to repay. I looked at him a second longer than he liked. Then I walked out past Deputy Miller, laid the level on the passenger seat, and drove back to the cottage with my whole life in 6 boxes and one true edge. That night I set it on my desk at the office, dead center, and watched the bubble find its window and hold. Level doesn't lie. People do. I decided right then which one I was going to build the rest of this on. The folder I hadn't opened was Raymond's. His statements. His accounts. The ones that came to the house in his name that I'd filed unopened for years, because a marriage runs on a certain amount of not looking, and I was fluent in it. Ruth needed a full picture of the estate for probate. So on a Thursday night, with Carol gone and the office quiet, I opened my husband. The lumberyard pension, the 401k he'd bragged about letting ride since the 90s. The statement from 2019 showed a withdrawal of $51,000, early penalty, taxes eaten, wired out in 2 chunks 8 days apart. Wired to an LLC in Columbus called Halewood Hospitality. Derek's first bar had died years before. This was the second one, the good location with the bad math. I sat with that for a while. Then I found 2022. 33,000 more. Same routine, same destination. 4 months before Halewood Hospitality folded, owing 3 months of rent. $84,000, his whole cushion, gone quiet as snow, while he kissed the top of my head and told me his boy was figuring things out. All those long walks to the barn with the phone. I finally had the transcript. And here's the part that hollowed me out. It wasn't the money. I'd have said yes. If he'd sat at our kitchen table and asked me straight, "Derek's drowning, I want to help him," I'd have written the check myself. Because that's what family does with money it actually has. He never asked. He chose the legend over the ledger, 12 years running. The town thought the Hales were carrying me. I was standing in the wreckage of the truth, which was that nobody had been carried in that house but the name itself. I cried that night, for the first time since the funeral, sitting on the floor of a staged living room between a bowl of wooden apples and a man's bank statements. Not over Derek. Derek was never worth salt water. I cried because I was grieving two men at once, and only one of them got a headstone. There was Raymond, who warmed my cold hands at football games and learned to make my mother's soup the year she passed, who danced with me in the kitchen to the radio with a dish towel still over his shoulder. That man was real. I won't let anybody take him, not even the man in the statements. And there was the other Raymond, who let his son call me nothing for 12 years while my paychecks kept the porch light on, who signed a prenup without reading it because reading it would have meant admitting there was nothing on his side of the scale. Both of them were my husband. Both of them are in that grave. You want to know the cruelest math I've ever done? It's not the 84,000. It's realizing the man protected his pride instead of protecting you, and understanding at the same time, in the same breath, that he probably told himself he was protecting you both. I washed my face in the model home bathroom, where the towels are stitched to the rack so clients can't use them. I laughed at that until it turned into something else, and then back into a laugh. Then I slept. Actually slept. In the morning, there were 2 missed calls from Ruth and a text that read like Ruth in miniature. Call me. We have a date. And a problem. The date was for the ejectment hearing, 6 weeks out, faster than Ruth expected. The problem was what it would take to get my title unclouded before the company bled out. Ruth laid it on her desk like a surgeon explaining the incision. To knock my house out of Derek's estate inventory quickly, we wouldn't just file the deed, we'd file everything, the full accounting. Land purchase, 2012. My funds, documented. Construction, my company, 310,000, every invoice, taxes, insurance, maintenance, 11 years, my checks. And to show the court the shape of the whole estate, what was actually in it for Derek to administer, we'd file what I'd found in the folder: the pension withdrawals, the wire transfers to Halewood Hospitality, the credit cards Raymond had been floating, 17,000 deep, that his estate now owed. Once it's filed, it's public record, Ruth said. The Gazette reads probate filings on Tuesdays. By that Friday, everyone your husband ever bought a coffee for will know he died broke, in debt, and living in his wife's house. She let that sit. There's a slower way. We win anyway, in 4 or 5 months. Maybe 6? I looked out her window at the courthouse square, where there's a bench with a little plaque that says the Hale family put it there in 1961. Raymond proposed to me in tall grass he didn't own, and I'd spent 12 years making sure nobody ever checked the deed on that story. Protecting the legend was the only gift he ever actually asked of me. He just never said it out loud. 5 weeks of payroll, 7 families, 1 truth with his name on it. I need the weekend, I said. Ruth put her glasses back on. Take till Monday, not Tuesday. Monday morning, I sat in my truck outside Ruth's office for 10 minutes before going in, watching the flag on the courthouse move, and I thought about every version of quiet I had ever bought. Quiet at the funeral, 2nd row. Quiet at church while my name curdled in other people's mouths. 12 years of quiet at my own table, purchased weekly, on time, in full. And the receipt for all of it was a brass deadbolt and a boy in a barn jacket calling me nothing on my own porch. The load has to go somewhere real. I went in and signed. The ejectment action, the objection to Derek's inventory, and the accounting. All of it. Every page. The deed, the invoices, the taxes, the pension wires, the debts. Ruth's paralegal stamped and filed before lunch. And by Tuesday it was public, and by Friday it was gospel. And there was no version of Maple Run that could ever go back to believing the old story, because the new one had exhibit numbers. The process server caught Derek Thursday evening on my porch, under my light, with the Hendersons raking the same leaves across the road. I wasn't there. I heard he read the first page twice, and went inside without a word, which for a Hale is a kind of screaming. Marjorie called me that night the first time since the funeral. No hello. You're tearing this family apart, Sonia. Is that what Raymond would want? I watched the bubble sit dead center in the level on my desk and kept my voice level to match. I'm not tearing anything, Marjorie. I'm returning it. Signed for. She hung up. I sat in the quiet I hadn't paid for. The first free quiet in 12 years. And it felt less like peace than like the pause after a tree cracks, before it picks a direction. My phone lit up again before I got to bed. The family wanted a meeting. The meeting was at Marjorie's, Saturday, 2 o'clock. And I went because you should always walk a site before you bid the job. Her living room was full. Marjorie and her husband, 2 Hale cousins I'd met at maybe 4 Christmases, a great-aunt whose name I have genuinely never learned, and a plate of store cookies arranged like evidence. Derek wasn't there, which told me this was the diplomatic channel. Marjorie poured coffee and made it barely past the first pour before she got to it. The filings, Sonia. The filings were the problem. Not the lock Derek changed, not the trash bags, not the will from 2009, the filings. Nobody's saying you don't have your rights, a cousin offered, in the tone men use to hand you a live wire. But airing Raymond's private business in a courthouse? He'd be humiliated. Pull the papers back and this family will make it right, quietly. There it was. I looked around that room slow, at all those faces trained by 3 generations to believe the name was the load-bearing wall, and I understood something that almost made me laugh out loud. Not one of them had said the numbers were wrong. Not one. The math wasn't in dispute. The volume was. The truth was fine as long as it stayed at a whisper, in the family, where it could be managed like every Hale debt before it. I set down my cup, thanked Marjorie for the coffee, and told them the papers stay. Driving back, I called Ruth and told her what they'd offered, which was nothing with a bow on it. Ruth was quiet a second. Then she said the thing I'd carry into every room after that. You paid for the piece, Sonia. He spent it. And the family, it turned out, was just getting started. Derek's answer came the next Wednesday, in a filing with a title so bold it nearly tipped over: Emergency Petition to Preserve Hale Family Assets. His lawyer, a big firm hire from Columbus, and you can guess whose idea and whose money that was, asked the court to name Derek temporary custodian of the family homestead and legacy properties, pending final resolution. Legacy properties. My house. The word my swapped out for legacy like a part under warranty. And Friday, right on schedule, the Maple Run Gazette ran it above the fold: Hale heir fights widow for family homestead. Read that headline again, the way I did, standing at the counter of the gas station with my coffee going cold. Heir, family, homestead. And then the other word, my word, sitting outside the family like a dog left on the porch. Widow. As if a woman can't be both the widow and the family. As if the homestead needed defending from the person who poured its footings. The story quoted sources close to the family, saying it was never about money, it was about honoring Raymond's memory. It did not quote the probate file, which by then anyone could read for $1 a page. That's the thing about a good name in a small town. It doesn't have to outrun the truth. It just has to outshout it for a few weeks at a time. The judge set a preliminary hearing for 10 days out. Ruth called it housekeeping. My crew called it something saltier. I marked it on the office calendar in pencil, then went over it in pen, because I was done writing my own life in erasable. But paper works both directions. That's what the name crowd never learns until late. The same public file that told the county Raymond died broke also showed, in certified black and white, exactly who had paid for what since 2012, and some people in this town read past the headlines. Monday morning, Gus Weaver from Weaver Building Supply called the office. Gus is 72, sold my dad lumber, sold me my first pallet of shingles, and hadn't said a word through any of it. He didn't say much now either. Read the filing, he said. Paper's paper, Sonia. Yours checks out. You're back on 30-day terms with us, effective this morning. That was the whole call, and I'd rank it in the top 5 of my life. 30-day terms meant materials without cash up front. Materials meant I could take the 2 kitchen remodels Carol had been holding, which meant payroll stretched from 5 weeks to 9. It wasn't rescue. Nobody was coming to rescue me, and by then I'd stopped waiting. It was traction, which is better, because traction you can build on. I gathered the crew in the yard that afternoon and gave it to them straight. Money's tight, the work's coming back, and any man who needed steadier ground could walk with a reference and no hard feelings. Nobody moved. Then Miguel, hands in his pockets, said, "We built that house, boss. We know whose it is." 7 men went back to the trucks. I went back into the office, closed the door, and let my eyes sting for exactly 1 minute. Then the phone rang again. Ruth. The hearing had moved up. The preliminary hearing took 40 minutes, which is a strange amount of time for 12 years to weigh. Judge Corcoran, a woman with reading glasses and no visible patience, went through the title chain out loud like a teacher grading in front of the class. Parcel purchase 2012 by Sonia Hill. Sole funds, 2 years before the marriage. Residence constructed 2014 to 2015 by Hill Custom Builds. Contracts and payments documented. Source of funds, Ms. Hill. Deed recorded, 1 name. Taxes and insurance, 11 consecutive years, 1 checkbook. She looked up. On what theory is this property in the estate inventory? Derek's Columbus lawyer stood and said words. Family homestead, decedent's residence, equitable expectation. And the judge let him finish the way you let a dog finish barking. The house was out of the inventory, she ruled. Struck. The cloud was gone. The emergency petition was denied for a reason she phrased so dryly the court reporter smiled. There did not appear to be Hale family assets requiring preservation, and Derek was ordered to vacate my house within 14 days. 14 days. I sat there with Ruth's hand briefly on my forearm and waited to feel like fireworks, and instead felt like a foundation curing, quiet, and permanent. But here's the detail I want you to keep, because I keep it. During the title reading, I watched Derek, and Derek wasn't surprised. Not once. He was already writing something on a legal pad while his life rezoned itself around him. He had seen his father's accounts during that last loan, had to have. He'd known since before the funeral there was no fortune, no homestead, no legacy, nothing to inherit but a truck and a debt. He'd bet everything on one asset, that I would stay quiet like always. And as we filed out, his lawyer touched my lawyer's sleeve and asked for 1 private mediation, family present, before the 14 days ran. Ruth looked at me. I almost said no. Quick pause, because we're close now. If someone ever counted on your silence as part of their budget, hit subscribe and put the word level in the comments so I know who's been listening all the way through. What happens in that mediation room is the reason I'm telling this story at all. Okay. The night before, I packed like I was bidding the biggest job of my life, which in a way I was. 1 banker's box, the deed, the construction file, the tax records, the pension wires, tabbed and ordered the way Carol orders things, so a stranger could follow the money in 4 minutes flat. I set the box by the door and put my dad's level flat on the lid, brass catching the lamplight, bubble at rest. Partly superstition, partly because I wanted one thing in that room that had never once told me what I wanted to hear. Carol watched me from the doorway with her arms crossed. "You're bringing a level to a knife fight," she said. I clicked off the lamp. "I'm bringing the whole toolbox." She laughed, then didn't. "They're going to offer you the house back, Sonia. You know that, right? They'll gift wrap your own keys and call it generous, and the price tag will be printed real small." I said I knew. I did know. What I didn't know, lying on that staged couch one last night, listening to a furnace I hadn't installed, was what it was going to cost me to say the word no, with my late husband's whole family watching. By morning, I had my answer roughed in. It still needed 1 more coat. The offer came by email at 7 the next morning, 3 hours before the mediation, which is a lawyer's way of serving you breakfast in bed. Ruth forwarded it with a 1-line note. Read it standing up. Here were the terms, dressed in 11 pages of Columbus letterhead. 1. Derek vacates immediately, withdraws every claim and petition, and quitclaims any interest in the property. The house comes back to me, keys by Friday. 2. I pay Derek $50,000, styled as a legacy settlement, in recognition of his familial expectations. 3. Both parties execute a joint family statement for the Record and the Gazette, affirming that the home and estate reflect the lifetime of work and generosity of Raymond Hale. And Clause 4, the quiet one, the load-bearing one. The financial exhibits get sealed by agreement, and both parties are barred from discussing private family finances, in perpetuity, penalty attached, forever. I read it twice at the kitchen counter of a house staged to look lived in. They weren't fighting the math anymore. They'd stopped pretending there was a fortune. They just wanted to buy the story back. Put the legend in a trust, seal the truth in a vault, and rent me my own quiet life at $50,000 down, with my signature on the lie this time. Not my silence, which they'd always had for free. My endorsement. Ruth called at 8. It's a good deal, she said flatly. On paper. House now. Litigation over. Business saved. You just have to keep lying in it. I looked at the level on the box lid. You paid for the piece, I said. Ruth finished it with me. He spent it. I had 2 hours, and I spent them the way I always solve a hard problem. I drew it. 2 columns on a legal pad in the empty office. Sign. Don't sign. Undersign. The house. This week. Warm. Mine. My crew safe. The fight over. And every casserole in Maple Run comes back with an apology tucked under the foil. All I had to do was notarize the legend, swear in public that Raymond's generous lifetime built what my invoices built, and that 84,000 vanished dollars never left. All I had to do was be the second row, forever, in writing. Under don't sign, months more, risk, a public accounting read by strangers, the family gone for good, and the man I loved, remembered by his real balance sheet instead of his laugh. There was no clean column. That's what nobody tells you about the truth. The invoice is real. I put down the pen and picked up the level and thought about the day Dad gave it to me. He didn't say congratulations. He said, every wall you ever raise will want to lean, kiddo. Your job's not to yell at it. Your job's to check it. $50,000 to never check the wall again. A pension's worth of lien, sealed by agreement, in perpetuity. And here is the sentence that ended it, the one I'd been circling for 12 years without landing. They were not offering me my house back. They were offering me my old job back, carrying the Hale name quietly at my own expense, with a raise. I set the level back on the box, bubble dead center, and drove to the mediation with the seal unsigned and the truth-writing shotgun, and this time, I held the door for it. The mediation was in a conference room at the county seat, long oak table, water pitchers nobody touched, a wall clock with a tick you could set a heartbeat by. The mediator sat at the head, a retired magistrate with the face of a man who has heard every family in the county lie about money. Ruth and I took one side. Across from us, the Columbus lawyer, then Derek in a new suit that fit this time, then Marjorie, then 3 more Hales arranged by seniority like a church photo. The cousins, the great-aunt, all of them there as family witnesses, which meant audience. Derek had his father's watch on and his father's smile out, the bank teller one, and I understood this room was the whole point for him. Not the money, the room. He needed the family to watch me sign the story back into place. The Columbus lawyer read the terms out loud in a voice like warm shortening. The quitclaim, the 50,000, the joint statement honoring the lifetime of work and generosity of Raymond Hale, the sealing of exhibits, in perpetuity. He said generosity twice, and the second time I felt Ruth go very still beside me, the way she does instead of objecting. Then Derek leaned forward, hands folded, and delivered the line he must have rehearsed on the drive down. We're being generous here, more than we have to be. Dad would want the house to stay in the family. The house. In the family. From the man 3 weeks out from a court order with his name on it, spending his stepmother's $50,000 in a sentence, on behalf of a dead man whose debts I was still carrying. The mediator looked at me and asked if I'd reviewed the proposal and had a response. The clock ticked. Marjorie smoothed her skirt. Somewhere down in the parking lot, a truck backed up, beeping, ordinary, and I thought, everyone in this room already knows the truth. They're just waiting to find out if I'll keep paying for the version they like better. I opened the box. I set the level on the table first, brass on oak, and let it lie there while I took out the folders. Then I looked at Derek, only at Derek, and gave him back his own words at the volume he'd chosen for them on my porch. My father's name, my father's house. You're nothing now. That's what you told me, in front of my neighbors, 3 days after I buried your dad. He held my eyes for about half of it. So before I answer your offer, we're going to do something this family has never once done with money. We're going to say it out loud. Ruth slid me the first folder. June 2012, $68,000, purchase of 6 acres, Maple Run. Buyer of record, sole funds, Sonia Hill, 2 years before I ever met Raymond Hale. Next folder, 2014 through 2015, construction of the residence, $310,000, Hill Custom Builds, 41 invoices, paid in full from my accounts. Every man who framed that roof is on my payroll to this day. Next, property taxes, 11 years, insurance, 11 years, furnace, well pump, the roof after the hailstorm. 1 checkbook, mine. The room had gone from quiet to airless. I took out the last folder and I want to tell you my hands were steady, and they were. But something in my chest was kneeling down. October 2019, $51,000 withdrawn from Raymond's retirement, wired to Halewood Hospitality LLC, Columbus. March 2022, $33,000 more, 4 months before it folded. $84,000, Derek. That's your inheritance. You drank it in business meetings and called it bad luck. And your father carried the secret to a heart attack so this town would keep believing the name was worth more than the man. My voice caught on the last of it, because saying it out loud was burying him twice, and I did it anyway, in front of the pew he'd have given anything to impress. There is no Hale fortune. There hasn't been since before you were born. There is a widow who paid for all of it. Quietly, for 12 years, and the whole time, the only thing this family was rich in was her silence. I looked around the table then, at every one of them, and set my palm flat on the level. The answer is no. Names get inherited. Houses get built. Nobody moved. Marjorie's cup stopped halfway to her mouth and stayed there. The clock ticked 4 times. 5. 6. Loud as a nail gun. The room went past quiet. The room froze. It was Derek who cracked the ice, and not the way I expected. No table pounding, no lawyer chatter. He sat there staring at the folders like a man reading his own biopsy, and when he finally spoke, his voice came out at a size I'd never heard him use. If the house isn't Hale, he said, then what was my whole life for? And for 1 second. 1. I'm being honest with you, it didn't survive to 2. I saw him whole. A kid raised on a legend by a grandfather who needed it, handed a famous name like a paycheck that would never cash, taught that being a Hale was a job, and the pay was everything he saw around him. He'd spent 33 years waiting for an inheritance that had died before he was born. The name hadn't just robbed me, it had raised him. I reached into my bag and set 2 things on the table and slid them across the oak. Raymond's toolbox key and the claim ticket from the funeral home for the folded flag. The things that were actually, truly, his father's. You can keep your father, I said, and I kept my voice as level as the brass. The watch, the tools, the stories, whichever version of him you can live with. That's yours, and I'll never touch it. You can keep your father, Derek. You can't keep my house. He looked at the key for a long moment. Then he took it, stood up, buttoned the suit that finally fit, and walked out of the room without a word to his lawyer, his aunt, or me. No apology. I want to be clear about that, because this isn't that kind of story. He just finally stopped billing me for one. The mediation ended in the official language without agreement, which meant the court's order stood exactly as written: 14 days, no 50,000, no sealed exhibits, no joint statement. The legend was not available for purchase. The Columbus lawyer packed his 11 pages back into a calfskin bag and shook Ruth's hand like it cost him. Marjorie stopped me at the elevator and I braced, but her voice had lost its churchboard varnish. "You didn't have to read it out loud, Sonia." I pressed the button and answered her without heat, because I was done spending heat on Hales. Neither did he, on my porch. The doors closed on her reply, if there was one. Derek didn't use the 14 days. Word came through Carol's church pipeline that he loaded a rented trailer 9 days in and drove toward Columbus in the dark. And when I pulled up my gravel drive that Saturday, the new brass key he'd cut from my house was sitting in the mailbox in an envelope with no note. Just the key. I stood there a while with it in my palm, cold and small, and thought about everything a person can lock with the wrong name and open with the right paper. Then I walked up my own steps, past the spot where the trash bags had sat, and let myself into the rest of my life. The house was cold and smelled like a stranger's cooking, and it was still, absolutely, down to the last penny nail, mine. I walked every room the way I walk a punch-out, slow, touching things. He'd left it rough, but whole. Raymond's mums were still alive out front, stubborn as their planter. I sat down on the bottom stair, the same stair where I'd laced my boots for 12 years of job sites, and I cried for the second and last time in this story. Not for the Hales, and not for the house. For Raymond. The real one, dish towel on his shoulder, terrible at florists, soft where he should have been straight with me. I let him go on that stair. Both of him. Then I opened every window in the place, and let November scrub the strangeness out. And I got to work, because that's the whole difference between a wound and a punch list. That week I did 3 things in an order I'd recommend to any woman listening. I took the settlement I didn't sign and turned it into a fence line, surveyed, staked, papered. I went to the courthouse and took my name back, legally, fully. Sonia Hill, no hyphen, no apology. And I called the sign shop. And by Friday, my crew was bolting the new panel over the office door while Carol supervised with coffee. Hill Custom Builds, ST 2012, built by hand. Miguel looked up at it and grinned. About time it said that. 12 years I'd let a name sit on my life like a lien. It took 1 Friday and 4 lag bolts to release it. 6 months out, here's the honest accounting, because you've earned the real numbers. The legal fight cost me $18,000 and a winter of sleep. Brannigan came back in the spring, hat figuratively in hand, and I took the job, at my new rate. The estate closed the way small estates do. The truck and the hunting cabin sold to cover Raymond's $17,000 in cards and the costs, and what was left for Derek, after all of it, was a number so much smaller than the legend that I never once heard it spoken aloud in Maple Run. He's managing a bar outside Columbus now, somebody else's bar, and I hope, in a way that surprises me, that the name finally weighs less on him than it did. It won't. But I hope it anyway. Marjorie still tells her version at church. The town still calls it the Hale place sometimes, out of habit, and I've stopped billing myself for correcting them. Some loads you set down by carrying them differently. On the first warm Saturday in May, I took down the last thing hanging from the old life. The spot in the living room where Walt's framed Hale family tree used to hang. And I drove a fresh nail, and I hung my dad's level there, brass polished, dead center over the mantel. Bubble right in the window. Nothing, it turns out, had the deed the whole time. There's a girl in my office now, Carol's grandniece, 19, learning to read a tape and pull a permit. And when she asked me last week why the level over my fireplace has somebody's initials on it, I told her what I finally know. A name is what somebody hands you, and it can be taken back, argued over, spent. But what you build with your own 2 hands, on paper that tells the truth, is the one thing on this earth nobody can inherit out from under you. That's my story. 1 changed lock, 12 years of receipts, and a level that never lied. If this reminded you to check whose name is on what you've built, the deed, the accounts, the business, do it this week, not someday. And share this with a woman who signs the checks and still sits in the second row. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.